Hi, this is Kath. So thankful that you joined me today. We're going to be looking at Psalm 10. But first, I'd like to read a verse. I've been actually studying Psalm 119 lately, and I wanted to read a verse from Psalm 119 because I think this is such a good verse. It says, this is Psalm 119, verse 2. Blessed are those who seek his statutes and seek him with all their heart. They do no wrong, but follow his ways. You have laid down precepts that are to be fully obeyed. Lord, we just thank you today that we are happy when we keep your statutes. And Lord, we pray that as we are reading your word today and studying, that we would be seeking you with all of our hearts, God, and with the intent to fully obey you. God, we thank you for what you're going to do in this study today. Amen. So let's dig in to Psalm 10. We're going to read it first. And then we'll start to dig in a little bit. Now, if you remember from the last video, and if this is new for you to this video, Psalm 9 and Psalm 10 are tied together. They are an alphabet acrostic. And so before I even read it, I'm just going to write that here as my category again. It's an alphabet acrostic with Psalm 9. So I'm going to write alphabet acrostic with Psalm 9. And I wrote on Psalm 9, it's an alphabet acrostic with Psalm 10, just so that I know that they're tied together. And some commentaries actually, or scholars will say that the two Psalms should be one. So we're just going to pick up and read this now. It says, "Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak who are caught in the schemes he devises. He boasts about the cravings of his heart. He blesses the greedy and reviles the Lord. In his pride, the wicked man does not seek him. In all of his thoughts, there is no room for God. His ways are always prosperous. Your laws are rejected by him. He sneers at all of his enemies. He says to himself, nothing will ever shake me. He swears no one will ever do me harm. His mouth is full of lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. He lies in wait near the villages from ambush. He murders the innocent. His eyes watch in secret for his victims. Like a lion in cover, he lies in wait. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. He catches the helpless and drags them off in his net. His victims are crushed. They collapse. They fall under his strength. He says to himself, God will never notice. He covers his face and never sees. Arise, Lord. Lift up your hand, O God. Do not forget the helpless. Why does the wicked man revile God? Why does he say to himself, he won't call me to account? But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted. You consider their grief and take it in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked man. Call the evildoer to account for his wickedness that would not otherwise be found out. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his land. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you listen to their cry, defending the fatherless and the oppressed, so that mere earthly mortals will never again strike terror." I know there's a lot in this psalm, but you can already see some patterns as we're reading it. And so the first thing I'd like to do is just what we've done in the past is kind of break it down and put some categories in there, because I think that's going to help us to be able to understand what's going on here. So the first thing we're going to do is mark down that verse 1, and I'm just going to make a bracket like this. Verse 1 is a prayer. There's the prayer right from the very start. Lord, why do you stand off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And then he goes on, and this is a long section. He is going to break down and talk about the wicked. What are the wicked? What do they do? And so I'm just going to write down here wicked. And if you remember from Psalm 1, that was the word Rasha. And I'm just going to write that there. And that's from 2. And actually, if we look at our next paper here, it's it's from 2 to 11. So I'm going to make a bracket here all the way down. This whole area here is all about what the wicked does, how the wicked lives. Okay? And then we have another section where there's a prayer. So from 12 to 13, this is a prayer again. So he describes what the wicked are doing, and then there's this prayer again, like, arise, Lord, lift up your hand, please do something. And then verse 14 is just a wonderful description of God's character. So this is a description of God's character. This is the God that he is crying out to and saying, I need your help. You are the God that sees the trouble of the afflicted. And then verse 15, again, is another prayer. Break the arm of the wicked man. So this, verse 15, is another prayer. And then we have the rest of the verses from 16 to 18, and this is back to, again, describing God's character, the God that he is serving. So that helps us when we're looking at this to divide that up, to help us understand this psalm a little bit better. So we're going to go back to the beginning now. So the first prayer is, why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And to me, that's such a profound statement, because I think that's often how we feel when trouble is hitting our lives, when we're afflicted or when things are going bad. We automatically go, where are you, God? Why do you feel so far away? And so this is a great psalm to even pray that line, when we feel that way. Then the next section, again, is the wicked. And what I did, because when I read the Bible, sometimes I really like to just look at and make lists out of the things that I'm seeing. And so I felt like when I was reading 2 through 11, that it would be a good idea to just make a list of what the wicked do. Just a really succinct list. So when you access the paper down below, again in the link that has notes for Psalm 9, 10, and 11, there is a little list that looks like this for Psalm 10. And this is just my list of what I saw when it was the description of the wicked. So what we see from the wicked is they hunt down the weak, he boasts in his lusts, he blesses the greedy, he reviles the Lord, the wicked doesn't seek God, the wicked has no room for God, the wicked rejects the law, sneers at his enemy. And that just speaks of pride. The wicked thinks he's invincible. His mouth is full of lies and deceit and violence and trouble. The wicked murders the innocent. The wicked secretly ambushed the helpless, and the wicked think God does not see them. So I thought this would be a good list to put in my Bible. And since I have enough room right here, I'm going to put it right there. And I already cut it out, and I'm just going to glue that in because I want to keep track of that list, because it just is really helpful for me as I'm reading through that. So here's my list of what the wicked do, because that really covers verses 2 through 11. You can choose to put it here, or you could choose to put it here with that whole list of what the wicked do on this sheet too. But I'm not going to break down all the things that the wicked do because of that, because we see that list right there. And it's interesting because we see the wicked he's wicked because he's turning away from God. We see pride. We see him basically thinking God's not watching and God's not going to do anything. And we see this like in all of his thoughts. There is no room for God. He is so wicked that there's not even a thought of what we would think of like a conscience, even thinking about whether God's seeing this or whether God cares. It's such a picture of what we would call Rasha, that wicked, crushing the helpless, thinking that God is not going to do anything. That line, that just killer for me, the line he says to himself, God will never notice. He covers his face and doesn't see. Wow, that is such a lie, because God sees everything. And yet the wicked are so deceived that they cover their faces and think that God doesn't see. And in the middle of this list, the author rises up and starts to say, God, I need you to do something. And so what we're going to do is look up some of these words. We're going to look up the word arise. Now, we've seen this word before, and it is the word, we're going to do 6965, and it is the word kum. And we have seen this definition before. This is that definition that is stand up. You know, it's like, you know, you're sitting down and you're not doing anything. I want you to stand up. And it's not that he's thinking God is not doing anything, but there's just a more active, God, I need you to stand up. I need you to lift up your hand. I need you to come and do something. Do not forget the helpless. And I thought it would be good to look up the word helpless. So we're going to write down helpless. And we're going to look up that word, and it is 6041, and it is the word ani, A-N-I, ani. And it means the poor, the afflicted, the oppressed, and the needy. Now, that's a better description, I think, than just helpless. I mean, there are times where I feel helpless, but there's other times where I feel like I'm seriously in need of something, or I'm being oppressed or afflicted. So this cry of, Lord, stand up and lift up your hand and don't forget me when I'm afflicted, when I'm oppressed, when I am needy, I think is such a powerful prayer. And then he says this, as we're working down here to the characteristics of God. But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted, and you consider their grief and take it in hand. I thought there were some things in here that I thought would be good to look up. So up here so far, we have looked up the word arise, and we have looked up the word helpless. But down here, I want to see what the word see means. God, you see the trouble of the afflicted, and you consider. I want to see what those two words mean. So again, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, the way I look up these words is I use the app called Bible Hub. And so let's just walk through that one more time. So Bible Hub looks like this. And when I'm looking up a word, I come up to the top here and I type in which psalm I'm doing. And I am right now in Psalm 10. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to put in Psalm 10. Psalm 10. And then, excuse me. And then we're going to be looking at verse. Let's see here. So we're going to come back to our verse here. But you, God, see the afflicted. So it's verse 14. So once you put in Psalm 10, you can see it breaks down all the verses. So we're going to go to verse 14. And then we're going to come back up here and we're going to click the word Hebrew because we want that chart. And this is what it looks like. And so then we see here, but you have seen. And that's the word that we want to look up. So we're going to go over here and we're going to click 7200. And now we get, it is 7200. It's the word ra'ah. And then here's some words that it means. Now there's a huge list here. So, and part of the thing is when there's a huge list like this, it's in context. What does that word mean? So I clearly am not going to write down all these words. I'm going to pick the ones that in context or words that bring it to light for me, make it more meaningful. So I'm going to first of all start with writing the word see. And then we saw that that was Strong's number 7200 and it was Ra'ah. R-A-A-H. And then the words that I chose to write down were become aware, So God, you become aware of the trouble of the afflicted. You discern and you inspect. So God is closely looking. You see the trouble of the afflicted. And then it says you consider their grief. Well, what does it mean to consider their grief? So I want to write down the word consider. And then we're going to go back to our Bible Hub app. And after we've looked up the word see, we're going to come back down to the bottom here and we're going to click this arrow and it will go back to our chart. And then we can look here, you observe to... So I don't see the word consider because it's a different version of the Bible. But you have seen the trouble and the grief, and you observe is the word they're using instead of the word consider. So I'm going to look over here and it is... Sorry, excuse me. I have written down that it is the word nabat. And I'm looking at my chart trying to see where I found that. So it says, you've seen, this is a different version. So you have seen the trouble and the grief, and you observe it to repay by your hand. So when I go back here and it says, you have seen the trouble of the afflicted, you consider their grief. So it is the word observe in this version. So sometimes you have to kind of look at it and figure out, like, if it's using a different version, then I don't see the word consider. I can do one of two things. I can play with this and try to figure it out, or I could go to, if we come up to the top here again, I could go to the parallel and I could look up different versions until I see, oh yeah, the word observe is the same as the word consider. So in the NIV, it says you consider their grief. This one says you take note of it. You take note of it. You regard. You observe. And so there's the you observe trouble. So now we know that consider is observe. So that's one way to figure out which word it is that I want to be looking up. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to write this information down. So it's 5027 Nabat. So we want to write down that first. So 5027, and it's the word Nabat, N-A-B-A-T. And it means to pay attention, to look intently. So this isn't just... I briefly gaze and see. This is more of a God stopping. He's paying attention. He's regarding it. That's another word, is regard. He's regarding it. He's looking at it intently. With it says even with pleasure. So regard with pleasure. So again, God is discerning and inspecting the troubled, and then he is paying attention. He's looking intently at their grief. And then it says, you take it in hand. I didn't know what that phrase meant, but I also knew that to look up take is not going to help me understand the phrase take it in hand. So the only thing I can do in that situation is to go to some commentaries and look up and see if any of the commentaries would help me with, what is this phrase take it in hand mean? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to circle it just so that that's something that I read and it didn't really make a lot of sense to me until I looked it up in a commentary. And the other way I can do it is I can look it up in a commentary, or I can again go to Bible Hub and do the parallel, read it in other versions and see if that helps. And that is exactly what I did. And I found that to take it in hand means to repay it by your hand. So to repay it by your hand. That helped me understand this a little bit. So he's praying, he's saying, God, you see, you discern, you inspect our trouble, you consider it, you're paying attention to our grief, and you are going to repay it by your hand. And then he goes right into the victim commits themselves to you. You are the father of the fatherless. That is who God is. That is the character that we see in God. And then we have this prayer, break the arm of the wicked, call the evildoer to account. So again, he's crying out to God and he's saying, I need you to defend. I need you to be the one that's doing the fighting, because I can't. I'm not the one that has the ability to do that. I want to look at a couple other things here. It says down below here, let's look at verse 17. It says, you, Lord, and again, we see all caps. We know that's Yahweh. So if you want to write Yahweh here so that you know it's Yahweh. You, Lord, hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you listen to their cry. Now, I'm seeing the word hear and listen. So I want to look those up just to see, is it the same word? Is it a different word? So I'm going to underline hear and listen. And then I want to look up the word defend. What does the word defend mean? You're defending the fatherless. So those are three that I thought would be good to look up. So I looked up the word hear, and we have seen this one before. So I'm going to write down here. And I believe we've seen this before. It's 8085. And it is the word shema. Shema. And that means to listen carefully and to heed. Okay, so then let's look up the word listen. And when we look up the word listen, we get a different word. It's 7181, and it's kashab. Qashab. Kashab. So it's not shema. And it means the same thing, though. It means pay attention and heed. Now, why would he use two different words? Well, you got to remember that a lot of this is a song and poetry. So if I'm writing poetry, I'm not going to use the same word over and over and over again. I wouldn't say, Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them and you hear their cry. It makes more sense to use a couple different words. It's more poetic. It sounds better. But the one thing that I want to point out here is the difference between listen here in our American culture, because I'm from America. Now, if you're listening to this and you're from another country, that might be different. But in our American culture, listening is considered a mental activity. And hearing just means words, sounds that my ear is picking up. But in the Bible, when we see words like Shema, it's widely used to describe hearing, but it also describes the outcomes of hearing. So when I hear, I understand. When I hear, I take heed. When I hear, I'm obedient. So it's not just when I see Shema, it's not just hear, it's hear and do. That's the thing that I have to keep remembering every time I see the word Shema. So I'm going to actually write that down. This is hear and do. And you see the same thing with kashab. It's pay attention, but heed also means do. So when he's saying, Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted, he's not just saying there's physical sounds going in and you can hear their cry. No, you hear and you do something about it. That to me is profound when I'm looking at that, and not just going, well, God, you hear me. You hear when I cry. No, you hear, you pay attention, and you do something about it. That just brings so much more meaning to that. And especially when I'm wanting to use it as a prayer and I'm crying out to God, I know that you hear, but that you are going to do something about it because you defend the fatherless, right? So let's look up that word defend. And I'm actually just going to go to the app again, just because I think it's good for you to watch me do it and not always just believe what I say. So we're going to go to Psalm 10:18. So right now we're in Psalm 10:14. So I can do one of two things. I can either click until I get to 18, or I can come up here and I can scroll down until I get to 18. So I'm going to click on 18 and it's going to go to the chart. And this one says to do justice to the fatherless. So that's the word defend. Okay, so we're going to come over here and we're going to click. It's 81.99. And I already get excited about that because, woo, I know that word. We've done this one before. It's the word shaphat. So what we're going to do is we're going to write down next to this 81.99. And I'm hoping that you're going to get to the point where you're going to hit some of these words and you're going to go, oh, that's a great word. I remember that word, shaphat. Shaphat means to judge or to govern. So we're going to write down to govern or to judge. It's actually like to argue our case. So he's on our side, arguing our case. And now the thing that we need to remember, and I'm going to repeat it because I don't know how many of the other videos you've watched, but shaphat is a derivative of the word mishpat. So I'm going to actually write that down in here so that I remember that. It's a derivative of mishpat. And mishpat also is a word that we use for justice. This is the restorative justice, the making things right. That's shaphat. So whenever we see shaphat, it's like this judge that's not punishing, but it's a judge that's setting things right. And that's who God is. God is a God that listens to our cry. God is a God that defends the fatherless and the oppressed. And I know that maybe you look at yourself and you're like, I'm not the fatherless, but I know that there's so many times in life where we feel like we are the oppressed. And I know that God hears and does something about that. To me, such a wonderful psalm when you break it down like that and you really see who our God is. So I want to ask, like I try to do every time, is just what is God speaking to you? What jumped out at you this time? What was something that you felt like you learned or something that you feel like God's stirring in your heart? Write in the comments. Let me know. Tell me what you're learning from this. Lord, I thank you that you are a God that hears the desire of the afflicted, that you hear and you do something about it, that you heed our cry when we are the oppressed or when we are the fatherless, that you are our godly shaphat who cares about making things right in our lives. Lord, I pray that you would guard us against the wicked. Lord, that when we look at how the wicked acts, that we can rejoice in the God that we have, the God that defends us and fights for us. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again next time.